I'm Tony. I'm an engineer here at Funding Circle, actually, but I've worked in places such as Manchester, New York in the US, Växjö in Sweden, Athens in Greece, and hopefully that goes some way into explaining my incomprehensible accent, which I do apologize for, but I am told that the talk will be recorded and maybe YouTube's auto-captioning system will help you understand what I'm saying today. I have faith. So, what are we going to do today? We have a big agenda. Whoop. All right, are we syncing? We'll see. The talk is syncing so far, but we'll move on. The agenda is full. I've botched the start. Hopefully this will work properly from now on. We have the talk about the accent. I'm gonna frame the problem. I'm gonna frame the talk. I'm gonna give you a contrived example about in code and testing code. I'm gonna give you a realistic example. Then I'm gonna reframe this. What are implementation details? And then I'm gonna show you how to avoid them in tests and when to actually focus on them. So, you know what I love? I love talking about implementation details. I love talking to other engineers and telling them what's better, Vue or React? What's better, is Postgres or Mongo? What's better for our use case? I love talking to product owners. I love talking to designers. I love to tell them, should we have models here? Should we have hidden inputs? Should we be forcefully opening things into new tabs? These things make me feel quite clever. They make me feel like a master of my craft. They make me feel like a... These things don't make me feel like a master of my craft, but that's what you get. All right, forget about this. Let's do it live without notes. Hope that's all right. This guy is cool. I'm not, but we'll get there. All right. So, I love talking about implementation details. It's great. You know what I don't really like? Listening to other people talk about implementation details, and not just because they botch their presentations, and sorry, sucks to be you, I guess. But no, you've signed up for this. You came here to listen to somebody talk about implementation details. But imagine this. Imagine you are working in a company. You are part of one of two teams that work into two products. And you're having a big early architecture meeting because those two teams need to work together. One team is doing a conversion product. Another team is doing a guest acquisition product. And that meeting is how they'll work together to show those two numbers, attracted guests and converted guests, into the same dashboard for your clients. So that meeting, you really don't want it to devolve into talking about implementation details. You never want that, and it's so easy to derail it into it being all about that. Why is it easy to derail into talking about implementation details? Well, because implementation details are a bit like indulging yourself. It does make you feel clever when you go on and on about how your Postgres schema is the best, how your RabbitMQ is pushing the events that are happening and you are subscribing like a pro. But you should keep that meeting on the high level. Why are you even doing this? What's the goal? We have a design. We want to show two things, two numbers in one page. All right, so the UI is going to need those numbers from somewhere. So you'll query a service that you need to build. How will that service get those numbers? Well, one team is putting their conversion stats in Postgres. The other team is putting their guest acquisition stats in BigQuery. Why BigQuery? Why not Postgres? Like this team is using Postgres and putting all stuff in a BSON column. And that's the point where you want to stop. You just want to say, zip it. Stop doing this. Stop getting into the implementation details. We are all engineers here. We know that we'll manage to get some things out of a database, no matter if it's BigQuery, and the one rule about BigQuery is never query BigQuery, or not. We'll manage. The high level is, we have these two teams here. We have these engineers. Who is going to work on what? Who is going to own the UI? Who is going to own the service that spins up? That should be the outcome of that meeting. At that point, if you start going on about your mastery of Postgres, it's kind of like making jokes about current events or pop culture or film series. It's kind of like saying, oh, we kind of forgot about the metrics, and then going on and on a tirade about how that episode of Game of Thrones wasn't really great. But do you want the outcome of the meeting to be, well, they botched the last season? No. And similarly, you don't want the outcome of the meeting to be, oh, Postgres is awesome and Mongo is terrible. That's not what you want. What you want is to go out of that meeting with your engineers knowing, this is what I'm going to do next. We know we're on it, we're going to deliver. So, I love talking about implementation details. I don't like hearing other people talk about implementation details, especially on such meetings. But you know what I hate? Testing implementation details. Now, this is a JavaScript and engineering conference, so we'll literally see some code and see how we use JavaScript to write implementation details and test that focus on the implementation details. But believe me, I hate all forms of this. It's like you have the product owner telling you, please test that this button is read 100% of the time. That's easy to do, so maybe you feel good about delivering the ticket fast, but what's the point there? You don't really want to do easy things, you want to do meaningful things. Maybe it's harder to track what's the click-through of the button, or what's the conversion, but that's the actual valuable thing. Try to focus on the things that are valuable. Try to focus on the things that you want to show. You don't want to spend your test testing things that are meaningless. Is the button red? And it might feel silly. Are we ever testing such things as, is this button red or not? And you'll be surprised. My argument is that, yes, we do. So, let's rephrase the problem. You're an engineer, so you're a problem solver. You love to solve problems, and you're paid to do it using code. You're also, well, let's face it, a lazy engineer, because when you solve the problems with code, you don't want to manually test, does this still work, and did I solve the problem? And you want to be confident that you solve the problem forever and something to tell you it automatically. And you're also an engineer that wants to refactor their code, often and extend it, because last week's code is terrible and the one you're about to write is genius. So how do you solve this problem? One good way is you write tests. Yay! You're confident now that the problem you're trying to solve is solved forever, and will be solving the thing you're trying to solve forevermore. But every time those tests that you write are too coupled into the implementation details, you make your code harder to improve. So you're defeating one of the basic things you wanted to solve. You want to keep your code easily extendable and refactorable. So how do we end up into the situations where we've written tests that are too coupled into implementation details? Well, consider this code. Let's say you're gonna join a new team. Let's say that team is working on a chat product, and you do some code archaeology before the first big meeting, and you find this. Consider this code. It's a helper method that gets some friend IDs, gets all users, who knows what that is, and then it filters through all the users to keep your friends and those that are online. Now, you've seen JavaScript before, so you think that you are iterating through an array twice, which is probably a performance hit. You aren't quite sure, because maybe like some compiler there is optimizing this out, or there is some TypeScript magic. Who knows? But you're pretty confident that looping twice is bad, and that you can at least make this into one loop. So what happens? Do you get any gains? So from this, you combine the two conditionals and are left with this. Just one filter, check it's online, check that that ID is one of the user's friends. Seems simple enough. You're excited to benchmark it, see what happens. But over at your terminal, you see your tests. They're red. You see a warning. It says expected filter to be called twice. So in a panic, you go to the tests and you find this. And you see that somebody was testing that filter was called exactly twice. And then you go mental. But of course, you might be thinking, all right, Johnny, that's ridiculous. Has anybody ever done this? The answer is yes, because I did it for this talk. But outside of the talk, mostly no. At the world at large, I'd say mostly no. Because this is, if you remember, the contrived example. So defeated, you are too scared to refactor this, because who knows, maybe the person that decided to do this, that madman, had some reason to check that you're doing this exactly twice. So you revert your chains and you continue your code archaeology. And moving up, you find something very, very big. You see that at the point where that method was called, right before, you see that you're literally giving it all the users in your database. And you've seen databases before, and you think that's kind of bad. Never mind looping through an array once or twice or 3 times. You can not loop through it at all. You can have a database query that gets all the users you need straight away. Amazing. So what do? You refactor again. So you add a wherein to keep only people that are inside that array of friend IDs. You add a simple where to say that online is true. And then, of course, before you try to benchmark and celebrate, you get this, wherein is not a function. And you look at your tests again, and you see that somebody's mocked the little next adapter that you're using to connect to the database. And now I'll need a show of hand to see, has anybody here mocked their database adapter? Apparently no one, which is great. Just a few people. But I'm not here to judge. Clearly, I've done this before. And I wanted to use this slide, the success slide, because I was confident that most of people have experienced this. But sadly, no, you're all saints. But still, that is good. Because this is not the talk to talk to you about. Don't do mocks like this. Try to use user stores. Try to use TypeScript and interfaces and stuff like that. This is not it, so we can just straight on skip that. And go back into the actual talk, which is implementation details. So what are they? So after your code archaeology experiment, which didn't go that well, you go into that meeting, and what you'll build next, it seems, is a username creator. You're gonna allow your users to create usernames. So you see some designs. You have these little forms. They're quite simple. They give you some initial states. To start with, it looks like this. Then, if there is an error, if the username is too short, then it looks like this. And if it's successful, then it looks like this. Great. What are the things here that are implementation details? Well, could be many things. Could be the button. If you hover it, the designer didn't catch that. Is it going to have a shadow? Is it going to have a bigger shadow? Not. Are hover states good? Bad? Who knows? What is going to be the threshold of 3 characters? Maybe not enough. 4 characters not enough. 5 characters? Oh, maybe that's great. What's it going to be? When should the form validate? On blur or as you type? Maybe as you type after you first blurred? There are so many things, but let's consider this. What if even the form itself is an implementation detail? Because your goal isn't, I want to show my user a form. That's never the goal. The goal might be, for example, allow users to pick a username. And for that goal, you've figured that, I'm going to put a form there, and I'm going to make them go through it, and then they'll be able to pick a username. That might be a valid goal. Maybe you've heard that users say your app is unprofessional because there is no way to pick a username. But does that really happen nowadays? Do you need usernames? Maybe not. Maybe the actual goal is allow users to be identifiable without using their real names, because you found that in your chat product, it was lots of people were uncomfortable when their full name appeared. Maybe you wanted to do @mentions. Maybe. So many things, all valid goals, but the question is, which one was it? As an engineer, I think you are as responsible to find out what the goal is, what the thing you're trying to solve is, just as much as actually delivering the solution that you've decided upon. So make sure to check, make sure to find out what the goal is. There is no right or wrong goal, but you should be challenging and finding out, are we solving for the right thing, or the wrong thing, or just because somebody put in a nice picture of a form somewhere, you just went ahead and implemented it. So you have a form, and as a prototype, you implemented it in 2 ways, maybe to impress your new team. Both of them use React. One of them uses old school class state. One of them uses new school hot React hooks. Can you tell if it's the one on the left or the one on the right? So I've deviated a bit from the implementation, because instead of a claim button, I've put here a button that will reveal the type of the component as soon as I press it. Who think, one is a function component, one is a class component, who think that this is going to say function when I click the button? So yeah, it is a function. I've also heard 50% chance, but I'm afraid that's incorrect. They're both functions. But they're actually, one of them is class. I didn't lie to you. One of them is a class component, the other is a function component. But you see how JavaScript works. Type of doesn't discriminate. So why should your tests? Class is just syntactic sugar for functions in the end, right? So it doesn't really matter to JavaScript. It doesn't really matter to React. It's going to work the same either way. But in our tests, we very often find that it does matter. Your tests would break if you were to refactor an old class component into a new hooks component. Why is that? Well, there are some frameworks that make testing implementation details too easy, and I have written two sets of tests for this. And one of them will work for either component, one of them will break. And it's not that the one I'm going to show, that framework, is bad. It's not that you can't write better tests with it, but I do have an opinion on this. I do think it makes it a bit too easy to test the wrong things. So you might be familiar with Enzyme. Airbnb are great people. They've done more good for JavaScript than I, that's for sure. But I do think Enzyme makes it a bit too easy to get into the implementation details. So this test, is it comprehensible if you haven't seen Enzyme before? If you haven't seen how to test this? You're setting some state, you're checking if some prop is success. That means nothing to the user, that means nothing to the browser. Why should it mean something to you? Why is it such a highlight in your tests? And because it means nothing to the user or the browser, it's why this is a brittle test that will break if you're trying to refactor, even if the functionality is the same, or even if you've got some bug of made a performance improvement. On the other hand, there are frameworks that help you avoid implementation details. One of them is Testing Library by Kent C. Dodds. Kent, sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I really disagree with him, but he's also a person that's done quite a lot for JavaScript and testing in particular. And I did initially dismiss this latest endeavor, Testing Library, just because it did have a tagline that's a bit too cocky, like, oh, encourage good testing practices. That's a bit much. But tell you what, Kent, you're right. This library does encourage good testing practices. I'm doing a talk today about avoiding implementation details at some points, and I am going to use this library as an example because it does help. When I was kind of burnt out with Enzyme, as good as it is, because I wanted to use hooks, I did resort into using using straight React render and being 100% confident, this is working for reals. And then a colleague told me, you're doing the same thing that Testing Library is doing, only worse, because Testing Library is also giving you a few nice little selectors to play with that are also ordered by order of preference of less brittleness or more assuredness that you're not testing implementation details, if that makes sense. You are supposed to write your tests now in a way that you'd be talking to a QA tester and say, find this little label and then put something there and then find the submit and then click that. And by trying to use these query selectors in that order, it will ensure that your tests are more resilient to breakage if you just change implementation details. So you'd notice that test ID is there, for example, but it's dead last, and something like class name is not even there. It's kind of hard to do. They purposefully not expose it in the library. Another tool to use that I've used successfully, and that it can also take an adapter, an extension to use testing library selectors, is Cypress, which gives you some UI, which always looks cool, allows you to take snapshots and go back in time to see exactly what was wrong, and runs on a real browser, on real Chrome. So you are more confident that this works for reals. It has limitations. For example, you can't do sliders still, and I'm not that keen on using Mocha and Sci, which was kind of old school now, I guess, and overtaken by Jest. But still, it is something to consider, especially if you want to do more end-to-end tests. And the problem with Cypress is that it does take a bit of time to spin up. So for the examples today, I am going to rewrite the test. I'm going to show you the test, rewritten to use testing library instead. So they look like this, and they really do look like something that you'd be saying, or kind of saying, paraphrasing, to your QA person. Find this with a label of username, click it, type something there, tab out, and then expect to find some indication that this is to sort, input something longer, and then expect to find something with an indication that it's good, you can claim it, get in. And I do think this is more readable, and the beauty of it is not just that it's readable, is that it can work with a class component, hooks component, anything. Maybe even a view component, who knows? We'll talk about that later. So, you've done this, and then you feature creep something in, because you realize you don't want to have the users share a username. You want usernames to be unique, because you discovered before that the goal today is to have your users be easily identifiable in a more discrete way. So you get some new designs, you have some new states, you have the check-in availability state, you have the, oh, it's not available, and still it is available, claim it. How would you rewrite your tests to account for this asynchronicity? It would look like this. It's kind of similar. It just has some await and async on the enclosing function. And I do think it's not crazy at all. It's actually quite readable. It is still something that you'd say to your QA person. But how does this pass? Why is this green? How does it know that first time the J. Magrippis username is taken and not J. Magrippis is not? It doesn't know me. The tests don't know me personally. So how does it do that? Well, if you look up, you'll see that you're bringing in fetch mock, and then you're feeding in some mocks to say, if you hit and look for J. Magrippis, you get a 200 because it exists. If you hit for not J. Magrippis, you get a 404 because it doesn't. And before you get too upset, I know that it's like, didn't we say that mocks are bad? But this isn't the mocks are bad talk. It's not necessarily bad to be mocking things, and using something like fetch mock, which at least is maintained by other people, by the community, and is used in many projects, is better than you making up some mocks by yourself. But still, sometimes you do need to make a stand and understand what are we mocking and should we be mocking? What are the abstractions that we want to do? You don't want to keep everything in your tests abstract just to make your life harder. If in your company you're only going to use React, you don't need to abstract away and be able to accommodate even using vanilla.js or Vue. If in your company you are going to be fetching things using fetch, then maybe you don't need to accommodate for Axios, you don't need to accommodate for GraphQL. But that is something to come to a conclusion with your other fellow experts. That's when you want to focus to the implementation details. You need to decide with your peers and say, all right, we're going to go full GraphQL on this, so don't need to abstract it away. Or we want to be flexible. Maybe we want to play around with both fetch and GraphQL and see if we have the benefits that we expect, and then maybe switch over. So just to finish up on some more code on how would you go about doing this, one suggestion is you could be rewriting the testing library render or React's render into taking in the component that you want to render, the UI, but putting it into inside Apollo's mock provider. That's GraphQL, or it could be like your fetch provider or whatever. So in the tests, how would this look? You would just be rendering as before and giving it an optional variable that has all the mocks that you want to store. So that's the variable that you would have that for this URL, you get a 200, for this URL, you get a 404, or in the case of GraphQL, for this query with this parameter, you get a result, or you get null on the other one. This kind of abstracts away what exactly is happening behind the scenes, the implementation detail, and keeps it in one file, because you'd be keeping this back into a test utils folder and always be using it. If there is a component that doesn't need to fetch things, doesn't need to connect with your Apollo client, your GraphQL client, then you don't need to pass the second variable, and you're none the wiser. If you want to be super flexible, you could explicitly say that this expects Apollo mocks or fetch mocks, and use them accordingly. And if you type it, then you have a better understanding of how to use it. But that's another thing. The idea of this is keep your implementation details as far out as of your test as possible. If you have to make some decisions on implementation details, keep them contained, at least in one file. So implementation details, they can delight or they can frustrate your users, they can frustrate your team, but only if users see them, only if the team iterates further. So if your form has the best UX in the world, then if nobody sees it, it's not going to delight anyone. It's not going to frustrate anyone. If your queries take 10 minutes to run, and the server catches on fire afterwards when the user changes username twice in succession, and nobody actually does this, then it's not that big of a problem. Don't try to think too far ahead. So try to get things out fast. Try to validate your propositions and see what happens. However, this isn't the talk of let's just keep descoping everything and only deliver MVPs. Because you can imagine how that situation happened, where the user story is, oh, we want to humanize somebody, and also make them seem as an outsider. So they'll have like a familiar drink while looking very secluded, and somebody makes the familiar drink be a Starbucks cup. Well, that's not going to work, and that's what might happen if you only care about the high level, because technically it fulfills the user story, but still, you could have done better. So, implementation details, be aware of them in silence. Do get into them in private, specialist to specialist. That's how you delight your users. And only after you have an idea of the high-level goals, which you should always keep a mind of to keep asking and checking, do I really understand what I'm trying to deliver, what I'm trying to solve? And as little as possible in your tests. Thank you very much. Questions?